He was arrested for a crime he didn't commit. A sketchbook was his only weapon. What happened next turned one boy's drawings into the voice of a national reckoning. A spring morning in the small southern neighborhood of St. Louis began like any other, with soft sunlight slipping through cracks of aging window panes and the distant hum of school bus rumbling along the worn road in front of a faded red brick house. Jordan Miles, a 16-year-old boy with softly curled hair and eyes that always seemed deep in thought, clutched the sketchbook tightly to his chest as he stepped through the door, head slightly bowed as if protecting something precious. Jordan lived in the Maplewood Courts housing complex, with a buzz of a TV from the upstairs unit blended with the scent of cheap coffee still warm in his mother's kitchen. Denise Miles, a night shift nurse, hadn't long returned from work. He never complained. There was nothing to complain about. Every morning, Jordan crossed the cracked concrete courtyard with a faint smile on his lips, carrying a world of color in his worn-out backpack and a quiet belief that life would be good if he worked hard and kept a kind heart. East River High School was about a mile from his home. Jordan liked to walk. It was when his thoughts drifted with his footsteps, when ideas began to take shape. An old street corner became the star of a new sketch. A man playing chess in the park transformed into a portrait filled with depth. He didn't talk much, didn't make noise. Everything Jordan wanted to express lived in a weathered leather notebook, where dreams were drawn in pencil with a detail that words could never match. That morning, just as he neared the school gates, a familiar voice called out from behind. "Yo, Jay, got the magic pencils with you?" It was Caleb, his best friend, pedaling up on his bike, hoodie flapping behind him like a superhero cape. "Always," Jordan replied, lifting the sketchbook in greeting. East River High wasn't a prestigious school, but it was Jordan's world, the place where he quietly created portraits from the basketball court, the noisy hallways, even teachers mid-lecture. Every morning to him was a fresh blank page, another chance to sketch hope into being. And in that moment, beneath the clear blue sky and the ringing of the school bell, no one, not even Jordan, could have guessed that in just a few days, his world would be torn apart by a mistake he didn't make. That afternoon, Jordan left the city library carrying a flash drive full of scanned drawings, his latest work, ready for submission to a fall art scholarship. The sky had begun to shift into amber hues as he stopped by Mr. Alvarez's corner grocery store to grab some snacks for his mom and a box of strawberries, her favorite treat after a long overnight shift. "$6.75, kid," Mr. Alvarez said with a warm smile behind the counter. Jordan nodded, pulled a few bills from his thin wallet, and thanked him. He tucked the bag under his arm, slung his backpack over his shoulder, and stepped back into the street, heart light, knowing he'd managed to finish everything before dinner. And then the screech of tires. 2 police cruisers pulled up alongside the curb, lights off, but their presence cut through the air like a blade. A voice roared like a thunderclap. "On the ground! Right now!" Jordan didn't even have time to understand what was happening before he was yanked backward, his arms twisted behind him. The grocery bag dropped, the box of strawberries tumbling out, bursting open, red juice streaking across the pavement. His knees slammed against the rough concrete. His backpack popped open, and his sketchbook spilled out, pages flipping in the dust and scattered shards of cracked sidewalk. I didn't do anything," Jordan stammered, the pain in his shoulder pulsing with every breath. "You matched the description. Blue hoodie, black male, 16 to 18. One of the officers snapped, eyes like cold steel. Jordan wanted to shout, to explain that he had just come from the library, that Miss Gloria, the librarian, had seen him there all afternoon. But then, the memories of news footage, of everything his mother had drilled into him over the years. Don't fight back, don't argue, just come home safe. Hit him like a hammer to the skull. He didn't resist, not a word. As they shoved him into the back of a patrol car, through the blurry glass window, Jordan caught one last glimpse of his sketchbook left behind. Its thin pages caught in the wind, his dreams fluttering away like fragile birds, torn apart in the breeze. He didn't know then that he had just stepped into a nightmare too cruel for even his pen to capture. Jordan now sat silently on the defendant's bench, the marks of the cuffs still fresh on his wrists, his eyes sunken from 3 sleepless nights in the county holding center. He wore an oversized orange jumpsuit, curled inward like a child trapped inside his worst dream. The ceiling fan overhead creaked with each slow rotation, echoing in the sterile courtroom where no one seemed to notice the tremble in his eyes. Presiding on the judge's bench was Calvin Mercer, a man in his 60s with slick-back silver hair, half-moon glasses sliding low on his nose, and a stare sharp enough to cut glass. They called him the gatekeeper of justice. Though few said out loud, everyone knew, if you were a young black man standing before him, your chances of fairness were close to none. Docket number 24 to 1087. The state of North Carolina versus Jordan Miles. The court clerk announced in a flat, practiced voice. How does a defendant plead? Judge Mercer asked, not even glancing at Jordan, eyes fixed on a file in front of him. Not guilty, Your Honor, the public defender said as he stood, young, visibly fresh out of law school, fidgeting with his tie like even he didn't believe in the words coming out of his own mouth. Very well. Given the severity of the charges, armed robbery, resisting arrest, and evading law enforcement, bail is denied. Trial will proceed immediately. Everything that followed felt like a movie stuck on fast forward. Unreliable witnesses, a grainy surveillance video from a different store, a vague testimony from an old man who'd been more than 150 feet from the scene. The public defender barely asked a single follow-up question. No one mentioned the library, or Ms. Gloria the librarian, or the USB drive that clearly proved Jordan had been somewhere else when the crime occurred. Jordan Miles. Judge Mercer spoke in a cold, mechanical tone. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds you guilty on all counts. You are a threat to this community. The sentence is life imprisonment without parole. The sound of the gavel cracked like thunder, sealing a verdict that felt predestined. Behind him, Jordan's mother, Mrs. Miles, collapsed onto bench, her sobs swallowed by the courtroom's stone silence. Jordan turned to look at her one last time, the woman he knew would not sleep tonight. And then the metal door slammed shut behind him. Firm, indifferent, just like the system that had swallowed him whole. In the dim prison cell, the flickering fluorescent light overhead buzzed like it was on its last breath. Jordan sat with his back to the wall, his orange jumpsuit wrinkled and loose, his eyes hollow as he stared to the iron bars. Every footstep of the guards in the hallway sent a jolt through his chest, only to die out again, like sparks vanishing into a storm. He hadn't slept in days. He still remembered the moment the cuffs bit into his wrists, the freezing pavement against his face, the way his mother's eyes disappeared behind courtroom shadows. Now, all he had left was a string of numbers, one phone number, drilled into him by his mother since he was 10 years old, just in case things go bad. The prison phone was an old payphone, the cord twisted and frayed, bolted to a concrete wall thick with silence. When the guard nodded toward him, Jordan stood slowly, his hands trembling. He picked up the receiver, pressed it to his ear, and began to dial the numbers he'd sworn he'd never have to call. Washington, D.C., inside a top-floor office of the Department of Justice, where sunlight streamed through a glass ceiling onto a sleek walnut desk. Outside, aides moved quickly, phones ringing nonstop, and U.S. Attorney General Benjamin Miles was about to step into a major press conference on criminal justice reform. His personal phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number. He was about to ignore it. Then it buzzed again. And again, something made him stop. "This is Benjamin Miles," he said, his voice steady as always. A pause. Then the faint sound of breathing on the other end of the line. A boy's voice, hoarse and breaking. It's me. It's Jordan." Nothing in the world could have prepared him for that moment. Every cell in Benjamin's body went rigid. Jordan. The name he had left behind 14 years ago. The name bound to a decision so cruel he had never mustered the courage to confront it. I need your help. They locked me up." "I didn't do anything," Jordan whispered, like speaking into a void. Benjamin placed a hand on the desk to steady himself. After countless political speeches, countless declarations of justice, now he couldn't find a single word. Only one thing was certain. If he hung up now, that boy would disappear forever into the black hole of the very system he once vowed to reform. "Don't worry," he said, voice tight and rough. "I'll take care of it." For the first time in 14 years, father and son truly heard each other. At the top floor of the Department of Justice, Benjamin Miles stepped into his private office, the same room where decisions of national consequence had been made, now transformed into a battlefield of personal reckoning. As the door clicked shut behind him, he loosened his tie and unbuttoned the collar of his shirt. He was no longer the United States Attorney General. He was a father, jarred awake by his son's desperate cry for help. Before him glowed the large screen linked to the internal government data system, accessible to only a handful of officials in the country. He typed Jordan Miles into the search bar. A cascade of documents appeared: arrest reports, indictment files, witness statements, forensic lab results. Benjamin read each line with eyes sharp as a scalpel. Jordan had been arrested for allegedly committing armed robbery at an electronics store, based on a matching description: black, wearing a blue hoodie, carrying a backpack. There were no direct eyewitness identifications, no weapon found, just a partial fingerprint match from a glove found near the scene. It had been processed by the Northbridge Forensic Lab, a facility that had previously been sanctioned for procedural misconduct. Benjamin entered a command to pull the case's historical records. The name, Judge Hudge Calvin Mercer, appeared at the top of the list. Benjamin sighed. He knew Mercer all too well. A politically appointed judge, notorious for handing down harsh sentences to minority youth. But what came next was even more alarming. Financial records showed that Mercer's nephew was the CEO of the very same Northbridge lab. A web of power, judge, lab, local law enforcement, an invisible network tightening its grip around the truth. Benjamin stood up and walked over to his personal filing cabinet. He opened a hidden drawer and pulled out an old notebook, one he only used when operating outside the system. He flipped to a blank page and wrote the first line in black ink: "The case of Jordan Miles, the truth distorted. Investigation begins now." He knew that if he moved forward, his career could implode. But for the first time in his life, he didn't care. That boy had called him Dad. And he would not let his son be buried beneath the dust of a false justice he had once helped build. In a small office at the end of the third-floor hallway of the Brookdale County Courthouse, Maya Alvarez, a 27-year-old court clerk, sat quietly in front of a glowing monitor, the fluorescent light above her making her brown skin look even more pale. As the daughter of a former immigrant and someone who had watched her own brother be swept into the claws of a broken legal system, Maya worked with eyes wide open and a heart that refused to compromise. That morning, she was assigned to re-enter archival records for Jordan Miles versus the state of Georgia. She had seen many case files, but something about this one felt wrong, very wrong. The original documents Maya had typed before the hearing, including a witness report from a bookstore near the library confirming they saw Jordan in another area at the time of the robbery, were completely missing from the trial record. The new transcript had been adjusted and bore her name at the bottom. Maya's heart pounded. One click, then another. She traced the internal access logs and found the deleted files had been removed by someone with high-level clearance, Judge Mercer's own legal aid. Maya stood up, palms cold and clammy. She had no other choice. At that same moment, in cell 214 Clayton Juvenile Detention Center, Jordan Miles sat with his back against the wall, eyes following the faint sunlight seeping through the barred window. Beside him were some old scraps of paper and stubby pieces of graphite, all he needed to keep the human part of him alive. Each night he drew faces, stories, dreams abandoned behind bars. He called them silent dreams that speak. At first, just a few curious inmates gathered around. Then they began telling him their stories, asking Jordan to capture their lives in drawings. A father who lost his scholarship because of his skin color. A teen who once dreamed of becoming a musician. A little girl in one portrait, drawn from a cellmate's memory, left a detention officer speechless when he saw it. The drawing was quietly sent out through a visiting volunteer. Weeks later, that same drawing surfaced online, accompanied by 2 hashtags. Hashtag Voices from Inside. Hashtag Free Jordan. Social media erupted. At the Department of Justice, Benjamin Miles was in a closed-door meeting with his investigation team when an aide walked in and handed him a tablet. His eyes froze on the screen. It was the portrait of the little girl with a handwritten caption beneath it. "We still dream, even in the dark." Benjamin gripped the armrest of his chair. Jordan wasn't just surviving, he was fighting. At that exact moment, Maya hit send on an encrypted email, attaching all the evidence that had been buried. From two opposing sides of the system, two quiet souls had sparked a fire. And this time, justice would no longer be the privilege of the powerful. In Block D of the detention center, the flickering fluorescent lights still cast their usual glow over the peeling paint on the ceiling. But today, the air felt heavier. Jordan Miles had just wrapped up an art lesson with 3 younger inmates when 2 guards entered. The taller one, with a scar across his neck, let out a low snort. "Looks like we got ourselves a little Picasso," he sneered. Jordan didn't have time to react before he was yanked roughly from the room. They dragged him down the hallway, past the cell blocks, and into the basement. The place no one liked to talk about. They called it the hole. But those inside knew the truth. It was a place where light never reached. "Sit down. Don't play dumb," said the other guard before slamming a rubber baton into Jordan's shoulder. He clenched his jaw to keep from crying out, not for himself, but for the drawings, for the faces he had captured, Malik Carter, Tyler, boys no one remembered, but who still lived through his art. Meanwhile, nearly 2,000 miles away, Maya Alvarez, clerk of the Brookdale County Court, had just concluded a confidential meeting with the legal team of Attorney General Benjamin Miles. They now had the file she had extracted, the deleted transcripts, altered witness statements, exculpatory evidence that was never submitted to court. And now, Maya's name was being whispered through every corner of the system. That afternoon, as she left the courthouse parking lot, Maya noticed an unmarked black SUV parked tight beside her car. There was a folded note under the windshield wiper. One line, handwritten in scratchy block letters. "Be careful. Silence is survival." Her hands tightened around the steering wheel as she drove home, where her mother was babysitting Maya's 4-year-old daughter. No one could get hurt. She knew she was in dangerous territory now, but there was no turning back. Not after hearing Jordan's voice in the redacted testimony. Not after seeing his eyes in the sketches he'd smuggled out from prison. Eyes that held no blame, only a fragile hope that the truth might still be heard. That night, Maya called attorney Sarah Lena. Her voice trembled, but her conviction was firm. "They know. They threaten me. But I'm not backing down. If they're going to take me down, then I'll make sure I bring the light with me." Meanwhile, Jordan, bruised and battered, sat silently in the dark, his head resting against the wall of the solitary confinement cell. He thought of his mother, of that last morning before he was arrested, of the father he never imagined would return, and of the unfinished lines in the sketches he never got to complete. And he whispered to himself, "If they're still trying to snuff me out, that only means the fire is real." Under the blinding flashes of cameras in a packed press room in Washington, D.C., Benjamin Miles, United States Attorney General, stood still for a few moments at the podium. His eyes settled on the thick file folder in front of him, stamped with 3 bold words: transparency, justice, truth. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice low but unwavering, "I do not stand here today as a politician. I stand here as a father, a citizen, and as part of a system that has failed." A ripple of murmurs swept through the room. Many who had once criticized him for abandoning his son, for remaining silent, were now at a loss for words. Benjamin pulled out a folder with a blue cover. Charts appeared on the large screen behind him. Irregular trends. Conviction rates for black youth far surpassing the national average. A name stood out in bold: Calvin Mercer, the judge with financial ties to private prison contractors. "Data doesn't lie," he continued. "Forensic evidence was manipulated. Surveillance footage was doctored. And a 16-year-old boy, Jordan Miles, was sentenced to life in prison for a crime he did not commit." A video began playing. The original traffic camera footage showed Jordan walking home from the library at the exact time the robbery was taking place miles away. Then came the altered version, the one presented in court, digitally tampered with using advanced deepfake techniques. The room fell silent. Cameras from national news networks zoomed in on the stunned expressions in the audience. Then the screen shifted to Jordan's sketches, graphite portraits on wrinkled sheets of paper. Faces of fellow inmates he'd spoken with: Malik, with weary eyes; Carter, smiling with a crooked music note drawn beside him. Tyler, the older boy who had watched over Jordan like a brother in the juvenile facility. "These drawings are not just art," Benjamin said. "They are testimony. They are the voices that were never allowed to speak." He paused, emotion flickering in his eyes, something rarely seen in a man who once led the nation's top legal office. "I hereby resign, so that no one else has to sacrifice their future because of someone else's silence." His final words echoed through the room. No one spoke, but as he stepped down from the podium, the entire room rose to their feet, not out of respect for his title, but because at last the truth had found its voice. On a gray Monday morning at Brookdale County Courthouse, the courtroom was packed. All eyes were on Jordan Miles, now dressed in a crisp white shirt, no longer confined by the prison-issued uniform that had clung to his youth. He stood tall, hands gently clenched, his gaze locked on the new judge, Honorable Judge Diane Whitmore, a black woman with silver-streaked hair, known for her integrity and meticulous attention to justice. Based on newly surfaced evidence, her voice rang steady through the courtroom, including the original surveillance footage, suppressed witness testimony, and falsified forensic data. "This court finds Jordan Miles not guilty." The sound of the gavel cracked like a lightning strike. Denise, his mother, broke into uncontrollable sobs, collapsing forward onto the bench. Jordan stood frozen, as if the verdict hadn't yet sunk into his bones. The courtroom erupted, but it was only when he turned, descended the steps, and wrapped his arms tightly around his mother that the true weight of the moment broke through, drawing tears from strangers in every corner of the room. At the back, Benjamin Miles, Jordan's father and former U.S. Attorney General, stood silently. No cameras turned his way. No applause followed, but in his eyes was a quiet ache of remorse. He had been unable to protect his son from the very system he once upheld. Right after the trial, an unexpected message landed in the inbox of Jordan's defense attorney, Alyssa Truong, a fiercely principled lawyer known for rejecting high-profile cases because she no longer trusted the system. There's a list of over 60 wrongful convictions signed by Calvin Mercer. All appear tampered. Attached was an encrypted link leading to a classified archive from inside the forensic lab. Alyssa forwarded it to the federal investigative team. And so, from Jordan's case, a tidal wave began to rise. In the following weeks, dozens of Mercer's rulings were reopened. Former inmates, wrongfully convicted, were brought back into the light. The local community launched a campaign called Draw the Truth, a public exhibit of Jordan's artwork at the city library, each drawing accompanied by the true story of the prisoner depicted. One afternoon, a 10-year-old girl, standing beside her mother at the exhibit, looked up and asked, "Mom, if I draw the truth, will the grown-ups listen?" The mother replied through tears, her voice trembling but sure, "Now they do, sweetheart, thanks to someone named Jordan Miles." On a warm April afternoon, the skies over St. Louis glowed gently with spring sunlight. Cherry blossoms floated through the breeze as a crowd stood silently in front of a newly completed mural outside City Hall. On it were dozens of faces, exonerated former inmates, victims once silenced by the system, and at the center, a portrait of Jordan Miles, eyes full of light, holding a pencil instead of chains. Jordan stood beneath the mural, backpack slung over one shoulder, holding the same weathered sketchbook that had once been crushed on a sidewalk. He was no longer the boy falsely accused, no longer a number in a cold system. He was a symbol. After the trial, high schools across St. Louis introduced a new program, Justice Through Art, inspired by Jordan's journey. The state legislature passed the Henderson Act, mandating a review of all convictions based on unverified forensic evidence. And at Cooper Institute of the Arts, the school Jordan once dreamed of attending, a scholarship was established in his name for students who had survived injustice. Though invited to speak at countless events, Jordan chose a quieter path. He volunteered at a local youth center, teaching kids how to draw, because, as he often said, hope has to be planted early before the darkness takes root. One day, in a small classroom on the corner of Vine Street, a boy raised his hand and asked, "Weren't you scared, drawing while you were locked up?" Jordan smiled, gently resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I was," he said. "But you know what? When you're scared and you still keep drawing, that's when you start rewriting your story." That night, Jordan sat alone in his small attic room, opening his sketchbook. On the blank page, he began the first portrait in a new series, not of prisoners this time, but of a nurse, a homeless man, a retired teacher, the forgotten. Because now, more than anyone, Jordan understood, justice doesn't begin in a courtroom. It begins when someone is willing to listen. And sometimes, it begins with a single pencil stroke.